In this video, we're going to learn how to make sci-fi bases. We have a few different examples here. Some of them have a little primer on them, and some are just bare plastic and Sculpey. So we've got one that has a little deck plating, little polystyrene tubing, more polystyrene tubing. This is just straight Sculpey. A couple other examples. This one's a little combination of the two. We have some deck plating, and we have a little polystyrene tubing here. This is just a larger version of the other ones, with some conduits that are a little bit heavier gauge of the polystyrene tubing. And we're going to work with several of these, learn how to use the deck plating, make several different types of bases. But next I'm going to show you how these can work with a real miniature. Here we have some examples of those type of sci-fi bases actually being used with the miniature. A couple on flying stands and one on foot. So you can see we've left enough footprint here for a miniature to walk around. You can see a different approach to painting each one. This one we've actually put more freehand on the concrete or metal, whichever you want it to be. This one has some deck plating, similar to this base here. Obviously this one has a little bit more room for the miniature to walk around on. Again, these can be used miniatures that maybe have a bigger footprint, like this Viridian. All of these, by the way, are Urban Mammoth miniatures. These are Archangels. So, next thing I'm going to talk about are the different widths of Sculpey and what the advantages are of the different types. As you've seen in our little segment on how to make the Sculpey, there's several different widths that I like to use. This is the most basic width. You can see here. This is right out of the clay extruder. Advantage is that it's going to be uniform. There'll be no variation in how thick this is. But it's pretty thin. You can see it's a little fragile. Has some flexibility to it. That's why we usually support it like this with cork, something solid, or we have it right on the base. Now if you don't want to use the cork to stabilize your Sculpey, you can make it thicker. So you have a piece here about 3 times as thick as the other Sculpey. You can see much more solid, a little less flexibility, and when you break it, you can see there's some nice texture right away just by virtue of snapping off a piece. We can go even thicker with this. This is probably almost double, 15-20% more than this. And here we have a really thick piece. That's almost twice the width. This, I would use this more for heavy things, large creatures, something that would go on a 50 to 60 millimeter base. But again, when this is broken apart, you have more carving options with a thick piece like this. And when you've got this thin, now you can always layer the thin Sculpey as well, one on top of the other, make different levels. Sometimes I use that to make stairs, whatever. But again, it depends on what you foresee, what you might need to use for your miniature. And you've seen a lot of these have rough edges. This one, I actually started out with a little bit more of a cut edge. This gives you a little bit better idea of just how wide the Sculpey is compared to the stuff out of the extruder. And the reason I cut this a little bit straighter, sometimes I like to have a straight edge, especially when I'm maybe trying to make a wall or whatever. It's fun to have actually one edge that's straight sometimes, not all entirely broken. So that is going to cover most of the Sculpey pieces that we're going to use. The next thing that we want to cover is something kind of unique to this type of base, and that's the deck plating. So we're going to bring that out next. Here's the next thing we want to cover, and that's our plastic sheeting with a deck texture. I know there's a little bit of reflection from the lights, shiny plastic. You can see this is kind of a typical sort of deck plating texture. This is mostly scaled, maybe not necessarily perfectly for a 28mm figure, but I have seen deck plating this thick, this broad, in real life. Actually, I can walk down the street and find deck plating that's about that scale to me. This is from, I think, a company called Plastruct. I think this is from Evergreen Scale Models. So we can see there's a nice difference between these two. We have these double tooth versus kind of, this is a more standard deck plating here. I like to vary things up. Sometimes I like to put both deck plating textures on the same base. If it's large, it's going to be a 50-60mm base. Sometimes I might try to get a little different texture. Maybe this on the higher level, this on a lower level, this on stairs. And there's more than just this type of deck plating. This is a very interesting one. Looks like corrugated metal, maybe for roofs. This is really fantastic for certain types of looted tanks. And then you can see I've kind of cut out some pieces here. These, maybe they look like they're just welded on. Or, in some cases, I like to use it like this. Sandbag base piled on top of this plastic card right here. And there's even more kinds. This is, and then I don't use very often. I don't know if you can see this texture, but it's got lots and lots of little thin lines. So again, sometimes just as a little variation in texture on your base, it can establish a whole nice context to that base. Just a little bit of texture. So we have 4 different cards and 4 completely different textures. So again, we're going to try and experiment, use a few of these, combine them with the Sculpey. But we still have one more thing to look at, and that's the polystyrene tubing that we need. Make all these little conduits and wires and everything else. So let's get to that next. So finally, we get to our polystyrene tubing. And this is kind of a basic tube. This is in rod form. You can see how nice and flexible this is. That's how we can bend the rod. Like so. It can be cut very easily. You can see you get a decent amount of this in a package, and I've already used several pieces out of this. Several different kinds. This is a half round. So it's got flat edge, round edge, and that is perfect for this. Right, this is that same half round. I have several different. This is a little bit heavier rod than the previous. And this is actually a flatter, more square type, which I used here. And that's this right here. And this is an even heavier version right here. So you can see the big difference, just how heavy this is. So again, maybe this is for doors, or again for a larger base. I think like now some of these bases, I say a flying base, really large. This, all of a sudden it's not going to look quite so huge as it would on just say a standard 30 or 25 millimeter base. There's also this. This is another typical rod. I'm showing you this because this is what we're going to use in conjunction with another material. And that's this. It's this metal. It's very flexible. As you can see, this is usually used as an armature in polystyrene clay or, say, Sculpey. I've used this myself. But as I've learned, this also makes a really nice chain link fence. And you snip some holes in it. You look at how it ends. This really, at 28 millimeters, this really looks like a chain link fence, especially when you use this rod as your uprights. And we're going to make a base using this, and we're going to show you how to do some chain link fence. Be very nice for, I'll say, a zombie side miniature especially. So I think now we've covered all the materials. Next thing I'm going to do is talk about the tools that we're going to need to work with it. So to work with all of our fantastic materials that we've talked about, we're going to start with some of the Sculpey carving tools. These are from a 12-piece set of wood carving tools. They're not incredibly sharp, but when you work with Sculpey, that's more than enough to carve it, shape it, form it, really without putting your fingers in too much jeopardy. And I've got several different types. Some for carving along an edge like this. Some maybe for gouging out some texture. We have this unique tool right here. It's got this 90-degree edge, and that's good for carving in textures like this, for cracks. Again, not terribly sharp, not going to do a lot of damage to the finger, but it's pretty effective on the Sculpey. We have this one. This one's more of a curved shape again. Maybe carving out something along the edge. Gouging something out in the middle. Don't use this one as much. Typically, these are the two tools that I'm going to use the most from the wood carving set. We've also got these tools here. Don't really use this end too much. This is a real business end right here. And these typically come in packs of 2 or singly. And what this will let you do, put it down here. You can see, lets me carve cracks. Lets me carve out from the side of the Sculpey. So these are pretty effective tools. Cracks relatively deep gouge. So let's say we want to do something that's a little more fine than these tools. That's why we have this scribe tool. It has 2 different points on it. You can see there's a little bit different shape to this point than, say, a typical dental tool. This is just a point. And while you can still carve with this. And you can see how fine it is compared to the other. The scribe tool, because of this unique shape, it's a little bit beveled. We can use it in a different way. We can use it sideways. It really, you can see, look at how I'm twirling this shape around. This is something that you really can't do, especially with these. It wants to hop out of that groove. And this tends to get stuck in the Sculpey. This It's designed actually for carving into plastic, maybe making texture on plastic model cars. So again, it can be beveled like this. You can use it like this. So this is really a fantastic tool. Get this, I got mine out of the Micromark catalog. And finally, there's several different blades and types of X-Acto knives. Obviously, this is good for really carving away at the Sculpey. What I try to do when I use this is keep the thumb out of the way, because this is really sharp. Definitely a lot sharper than this. And that's why, see, we want to carve away this edge. This will really, really dig in. And again, I try to keep, in case this does this, my thumb is down here instead of here. So that covers most of our tools. There is one other tool that I like to use, and this actually came with my side cutters. It was a set of 2. And this is really effective at breaking some of the larger pieces of Sculpey. You know, when I try and break off this little piece with my finger, there's not enough for me to get to, and maybe I end up breaking off more than I want. What this will do, again, it's like a pair of pliers, and it just lets me take that a little bit better precision, removing this piece. So now we've covered the materials and the tools. I think it's time to make a few bases. I think we're going to start off something a little more basic like this. Learn to use the polystyrene tubing in our Sculpey. For our first base, we're going to try to use some deck plating with our Sculpey. See, we've got a few different types of the polystyrene tubing, a few different thicknesses of the small tube. We have the half round right here. Let's see if we can show that. So there's your half round, 2 different thicknesses, and then we've got our flat rod, nice and thick right here. The base, and some of the tools we'll need: scissors to cut the polystyrene tubing, though an X-Acto will also work, and then a few tools to work with the Sculpey. Let's move some of the tools out of the way, move some of the tubing out of the way. First we need to do is break off a piece of that Sculpey. So what I'm going to do is do a fracture right down here. This will work for a few bases. So what I want to do is about there. A couple different ways I can do this. Just kind of put my thumbs here and put some pressure, a little bit of pressure. Show it the other side. See how this is starting to fracture. It's not complete. I'll work down here. So there we go. Piece roughly about the size of a 30, a little bit bigger than a 25, but then we can cut that down to make that fit. We're going to work with both size bases. We even do a 40mm round to try a few different things. But for right now we're working with this 30. So now we want to make this compatible with the 30. So I need to do one more break here. Now I can either do this with my hands, or I can use this tool. I'm going to stick with my fingers right here. Again, fracture that away. And you can see, look at all of this texture in here. So different striations. That this is fantastic. I almost don't have to do anything else to create what looks like a broken concrete texture. So again, if this extends over the base a little too far, we can snip that away and carve that away. I'm going to let this actually be a little bit bigger maybe than I normally would, just so we can get more of the deck plating on here. So we have some room for that. Maybe some more room for your polystyrene tubing. I'm going to work on this edge a little bit here. I'm going to bring out some of the Sculpey tools. This edge is a little funky here. Again, we have an overhang. It's a little bit unsupported. I'm going to cut away some of that. So again, thumb stays down here. And level that out a little bit. Maybe take some of that away. One thing you may want to do, you saw some of those Sculpey pieces flying towards me. If you're really concerned about that, you can wear some safety goggles. I'm usually working with a magnifier, so in between me and this Sculpey is probably 3/4 of an inch of plastic lens. So that's really not going to affect me very much. So we're going to carve this down. I'm not going to get too crazy with this top surface because, again, most of it is going to be covered by this deck plating. That's why I'm not going to get in and I'm not going to turn this into a crater. Because, again, we want to cover it with deck plating, have room for other materials. I am going to work on this bottom edge here, make this a little bit smaller so that it fits on that base a little better. So there we go. Not a bad footprint. I'm going to glue that on there. I like this glue. You can see it says thick. This is almost more like a gel. Other super glues like this tend to be a little bit on the runny side. Sometimes it actually works well. Sometimes that is actually a little bit more helpful for working with this polystyrene tubing. But I tend to like the thick. So we're going to use that and glue this base down. And as that sets, I'm going to plan out what we want to do with our deck plating. So Sculpey, it's very absorbent. So you can see this is already starting to stick. Not a lot of time to shift it around. So there's our base. Now we want to figure out just how much of it do we want to cover with deck plating. More deck plating, less. I have a few examples here. This one obviously has more deck plating. So for this one, let's go with a little bit more. Now this is a little bit straighter of an edge. So we want to maybe start with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over, holding this down, and then just do very rough this pencil, mark off what I would need to cut away. So you can see we're going to just take our scissors here, and we don't have to, this is again not exact because this is supposed to be maybe some rusted deck plating. Just going to cut along that edge, pop this piece out. There we go. And you can see, tried to make a little bit of an angle here. I didn't want to make this perfectly in half. This is kind of a composition nightmare. You either want to go with less, with more, and you can see that I actually put it on a bit of an angle too. Now we've got some overhang here. A couple of things we can do with that. We can either, once it's been glued, you can carve it down to match, or we can take a different tool here. You can see I'm going to distress the edge of this. Make it look like it's broken deck plating. But I think this edge here, I want this to be a little more flat because we want to put this on top of it. So Make a little more room for that. Cut this away. Snip this away. And let's see if I found where my edge is. Here we go. So I'm going to glue this down. And this is going to set relatively quickly because the Sculpey is just so absorbent. With that, we can do a few different materials here. We can do a half round. We could use the thinner piece. So again, a whole different look. I'm going to try to so you can see some of this. Here, let's cut away a piece. There we go. So again, it's every base. If you want to try and get as much variation as you can go with that. Let's cut off a piece of the half round. Each one is going to give you a slightly different look. And then you've got your heaviest piece. I'm not going to go with the heaviest one just yet. I'm actually going to stick with either the half round or my flat. And I'm going to go with the flat one here. So what I'm going to do is measure that a little bit. Get my pencil here. Cut this. And I'll glue that in place. I'm going to let that settle a little bit before I try and take away this little excess here. So right away, we have something that's interesting, and it's more than enough space for him to stand on. Stand entirely on the deck plating. But we want to add a little more interest to this area, like what we've got here. Now with this being a little lower profile, this is not going to make a whole lot of sense. That's where we would stick with some of this tubing here. I'm even going to go with the thinner tubing. I'm going to cut a few small pieces. And we're going to do a few things. We can either place them straight or give it a little bit of a bend like this. And depending where we cut this, it'll show more of that bend. So we're going to do that. Put a little glue, just a tiny bit. Now this is probably where the more liquidy glue might be better. And I really like this type of glue. So I'm going to move it to match my shape. And try and make sure that this stays perpendicular. There we go. A little bit of a 90-degree angle. I'm going to cut this off later once this glue settles a little bit. And I want a piece next to that. Go. So very quickly, we've got ourselves some deck plating texture and some either wires, conduits, whatever. Now as that sort of settles, this glue is dried a little bit, so I'm going to try and fix this edge right here. So you can see we've matched this a little more to our Sculpey. Same thing on this side with this piece that hangs over. Just going to work away at a little bit at a time, not too much at a time. You can see that I left this distressed edge out here. This is a little more settled. Take my scissors. And there we go. You can leave it like this, or we can try and put in these rivets. I'm going to show you how to do that. It'll be hard to see here because it's just so small. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself something darker. Use this little piece of deck plating right here. And we can use either one of our tubing. You can see this one a little bit thicker than this. I want to actually use this thicker tubing to make some rivets to go along this top surface. And this will be a little bit hard to see. Basically what I'm going to try and do is shave off little cylinders of this. So what I want to do is condition the edge of this so that it's as pristine as possible. Now there's a few different ways to do this. Hopefully you can see this. I know it's really, really small. I'm just going to shave off this edge, almost like you're cutting tomato slices. Now they're not going to be exactly perfect, and sometimes they're going to bounce away. So you can see how that's stuck to the knife. Right there you can see it's so thin you can barely even see it. And these are the little shavings that we're going to put along right here. So I've got this. I'm going to do a few more. They tend to have some static electricity. Generally, I like to not have them on my cutting surface because, again, it has a tendency to pop and bounce right off. But we're going to shave off a few more thin slices. So you can see here on the knife, a few more little thin slices. I'm going to use this tool, get those off the knife, off of my finger and onto, there we go. Where's our other piece? There it is. Again, this is going to be a little bit frustrating because you can see like to hop around, jump around. There we go. So I'm going to go with these four, and now we've got to glue them. Here we're going to do some little dots of glue. And now you can either put a dot of glue directly here, or always keep these little guys around. I'm going to apply a little glue there. Now I'm going to take some of my tubing here and make a little applicator out of that. So I'm going to take this. Now I'm going to put 4 little dots. Little dot there. Looks like I might only get 3. I want some even spacing here. And generally, a sharp X-Acto knife is the best thing to use to pick these up and then place them inside your dot of glue. Right now that probably looks mostly just like a glossy dot of glue, but there is a little slice of that plastic card there. Alright, so we've got 3 of those. We have our deck plating, a little bit of Sculpey texture, and we have some conduit. Again, we've kind of matched this pretty well. And maybe want a base that is a little more with these conduits, and we're going to use this. So let's move on to that. For our next base, we are going to make conduits on a basic Sculpey surface using some of our heavier polystyrene tubing. We're going to use this heavier half round, the square, and also still use some of our thin tubing. We might use the flat, maybe not, depending. And we've got a piece of Sculpey that we broke away to make our previous base, right here. So let's try this again. How do we want to fracture this? We're going to put the base here. Which side do we want? I don't want this side because it actually it's a little bit rougher. So I'm going to try and break this right here. Right here where you see me with that line. And there we go. You can see there's some overhang on the base. Again, I'm having more overhang just so that we can do a little more texture. But first I'm going to cut down some of the surface. X-Acto knife. Carve away some of this. Maybe this piece, cut away. And take away a little bit of this corner also. Now since we are not going to cover this up with deck plating, this is where I might go in with this tool and pick away a little more. If the camera shakes, that'll let you know just how much pressure I have to put to do that. And right now I am working on about a 50-year-old solid wood drafting table. So if the camera shakes a little bit, you can tell that that's just how much force that I'm going to use. And that's why I've got it down here, because if I do this, well, it's okay. But to really pop away some of this, I need to put some significant downforce. We'll compare this to our base. There you go, fits reasonably well. So let's glue that down. Thick glue. One thing I will do sometimes, we've got this little lip here. It's not going to make a lot of contact. Sometimes I might use some little piece of deck plating to throw in there and fill that gap. I also sometimes will use my refrigerator magnet sheets to fill that out. So let's do that. Take my scissors. So this is now flush. So when I glue this here, I have a little more contact than if it was just that lip. Because these are going to make contact on here. This again, I use my refrigerator magnet. Make sure that we fill that gap. This dries just a little bit. Let that solidify. We're going to set this rod, again, either here or here, maybe here. We don't want is this. We don't want to divide this in half. We have to. Also, what that's going to do is, again, set more room for our miniature. Otherwise, here he's going to have to straddle this. And if we want some of this extra texture, then it's not going to leave any room for the feet. So I either like this, or maybe I like this. But here, I tend to like things on an angle. I tend to not follow this. So maybe I want to go on an angle more like this. Which way do I want to go with this? We're going to go right here. So I'm going to mark with my pencil roughly how I want to cut that. Snip that off. A few different ways you can do that. You can either score it with your X-Acto knife and break it. You can also use a razor saw like this, cut the edge. I tend to like to score it and break it because that's going to give us a more random texture. So what I'm going to do is break the surface here a little bit, take it, and like so. So you can see there's an uneven break there, and that's more what I wanted to have. This, just going to carve that away. And now we can glue this down here, glue it over here, wherever. I think I had this planned for up here, so let's glue that. Again, this will set up pretty fast, so you're not going to have a whole lot of time to move this around. That's already set. So what I'm going to do is take this X-Acto knife, cut some of this away without cutting away parts of my finger. This pretty much matches up. There we go. So we've established this. Now we're going to use some half round right about there. Just like so. So again, I'm going to put this down. I'm going to grab our pencil. I'm going to mark where I need to cut it. This is thin enough to where scissors. Snip that off. Cover it a little bit. So there we go. And that's going to go right about there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take, after that's glued in, and take some of our thinner tube and make these pieces on either side of it. And you can see again I'm working in odd numbers. Maybe 2 on one side, 1 on the other, 3 in total. I don't necessarily, I want to have lineups of 4 or 5 all in a row. I want to get some spacing. So what I'm going to do is glue down our half round. Sometimes with the gel glue you're going to get a little bit of a collection of some of the Sculpey dust, and it starts to combine. That means your cap's not going to fit on as well, so you want to clear that away as that starts to build up. Okay, that's reasonably straight, right about there. Alright, next, I'll take this tube, and this one's going to go straight. There, and this one I'm going to cut it in advance. Usually I come afterwards. Cut that now, we're going to glue it down. So there we go. We have our second piece. Now I'm going to take some of the thinner rod. You can see it's a little bit thinner than that. And we're going to bend a piece. And you can try this a few times to make sure just exactly how you want it. Now, we go closer, go down here. I'm actually going to go a little bit closer. So you can see I'm going to try and glue this right about here. I don't want to get too crazy with the glue. Don't need a lot. Here we go. I'll let that settle just a little bit before I snip off the edge. Now we want some rivets along here. We've already seen how we did that on the last one. I'm going to make some of those real quick. Hold this down. Snip that away. Clear off the space. And with our knife, I'm going to shave away some of these little pieces. And it looks like about 3 is going to work again. Second piece. This is actually being very cooperative. They're not bouncing around like they usually do. I guess gravity's working a little better. So there's our 3 little pieces. Take my glue sprue. My little dot of glue there. And 1, 2, 3 dots of glue. Pick up my rivets. Three rivets in place. That technique also works really well on tanks, plating on tanks. There we go. Slightly larger scale than this. Again, I just wanted people to see this a little better. There we go, and we still have place for our miniature to stand here. Most likely I'd put him on this way. Foot's gonna go here, this foot's gonna go here. We could put some sand and gravel if we wanted to. But again, nice little base, shows you how to use that tubing. So my next base, we're going to maybe use more of a combination of the two. Maybe try some large conduits. Maybe a second level of Sculpey. For our next base, I want to make a few levels like this one, where we've got our thicker piece of Sculpey and the next piece of Sculpey to create that second level, and use some deck plating. I'm going to use one of the smaller bases here. Again, place, break, and we'll carve away some of the extra. I'm going to show you the pliers tool here for breaking away some of this. So what I'm going to do is just grab the ends here, break some of this away. I'm going to keep this, because what I'd like to maybe do is that. Break off some of this point. So again, a couple of ways you could do this. You can carve it away this way, break it away, and end up taking that point off of there. There's no set way that you have to do it. That fits our base a little bit better. Glue this on. Maybe we snip a little more away. And I want to gouge a little bit of that out. And here, this is just not sharp enough to hurt the fingers. I'm going to cut a little bit of that away. Glue it down on the base. And as that dries, plan out what we want to do with this. I want to leave enough room for polystyrene tubing to to work its way around. And I want to make sure that this is a little bit more of a flat angle. So you can either use a protractor, triangle, whatever. I'm just going to eyeball this. So there's one. Second cut. I'm going to finish this off. Does not take much pressure when all you're doing is a nice clean little shaving like that. We're going to break this off. We want to glue this down. I'm going to glue it down right about there. And once the glue is set a little bit, I can break off that remaining part there. First, I want to make sure that's a little bit straighter. Put this back. Okay, so we're going to go about there. Glue it down. Spread the glue out. Position that piece. Again, a few different ways I can do this. I can carve it away with the X-Acto. I can break it away with this tool here. It's a reasonably flush edge. We can make it even more flush. Carving this all away. We could even throw a little rock and gravel over this if we needed to. Okay. So we have our stair step here. It's one that we can put our deck plating on top of. So I'm going to cut a little pilot piece here. And just like I did with the Sculpey, position it, mark it, and cut it. Now this, you can see I'm working it flush. Now what if we wanted to I'm going to show you how to actually make a little bit more of an interesting edge than just this kind of floating. What we're actually going to do is this. So again, I'm going to mark where my cut needs to be, right about there. Glue that down. And you don't have a whole lot of time before that really just adheres to the Sculpey. There's our first piece. I'm going to put another piece along here. See if I can find my piece that flew away. And that's about right. Let's glue this down. You are going to get glue all over your fingers if you make a lot of these bases at the same time. I mean, it's a fact of life. I get used to gluing my fingers together all the time. So now, we have a nice little setting for our deck plating. So now we're going to flip this over and trace out this outline. So we know we need to cut this away. Yet not going to be terribly choosy about following that line exactly. And this extra, we'll cut that once the glue is set. So let's get that glued in. Swish this around and press. So there we go. This is a little bit more interesting than this. Now again, we can put the rivets along the top of that, just like we did here. But instead, I'm really more interested in what are we going to do with these parts. So we can go with our half round and go parallel to it. And go a few pieces of half round here. Put this on this side, so actually I think I like that. And go with some half round over there. Now, do I want to use the smaller half round? Let's see if I can get you something to compare those two. Yeah, I think the other half round is just going to be too small, so I'm going to go with this right over here. Cut off a small piece. I'm going to use the X-Acto knife here so this doesn't jump too much. Put my finger over it so that it doesn't fly away. So I'm going to go right there with that. Glue this down. Then we have that now. I can either have it bent this way, could have it go around the curves this way. I'm going to go with this. I'm going to reduce that, and I'm going to go with this piece right about to here. Spread out my glue, glue that down. I can even go with my flat. There's just many different combinations I can do. Could even put this here. Again, it's all up to you, what you would want to do with it. And have this piece go right about there. And I'm going to let this settle a little bit. Now, what do we want to do with this edge? Make it distressed and cut it away. I'm just going to shave it slowly away till it's flush. We could even take some sand and gravel, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to grab some sand and gravel and some glue. So we've got some medium and some white. And I've got my Elmer's glue with the stronger formula. Again, wood glue is just fine. I tend to like this. It seems to dry reasonably fast and be strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill all of this area here. Like that. Get up against the edge of the deck plating. Can even take my little glue applicator here spread that around, maybe even spread it over the top. And start with some medium gravel. And then the light. So now we've masked where the joint was between the two layers of Sculpey, and we've kind of hidden away where some of this deck plating hangs over. And by now this has dried pretty well. Snip these off. Now I can leave this hang over. Again, I can take my X-Acto and gently shave that down. There we go, another base. Clear away some of our debris. So in no time at all, 3 bases, similar materials, they all have a very different flavor. Again, your bases probably won't have as much overhang as this, but I went with a little more just so that you could see what we did. So you can see the difference here. See that edge versus this edge where we've used the sand and gravel. Typically for myself, I normally do this. There's one last thing that I want to show you, and that would be the chain link fence. Here's the items that we need, last but not least, for our chain link fence. We have our polystyrene tube. I'm going to use for our upright. I'm going to use a razor saw to cut that. One little piece of Sculpey and our base. So what I'm going to do is kind of carve out this. Very quickly. And have kind of a long horizontal feel to this base, so it gives us enough room to put a few of our uprights on our chain link. Alright, what I want to do is at least have one here and one here. So first, let's measure just how high we will. You don't want this to be this high. I'm only going to go about this high or so. So I'm going to cut this now with a razor saw. First, let's get some glue on this so that it sets. While we do that, did the trick of the refrigerator magnet to make that a little more flush. Glue that down. And now we're going to cut away about that much with our saw. I'm going to rotate this so that we get more of a flush cut. You can see I'm cutting relatively gently here. And there we go. I'm going to take my X-Acto, freshen up that edge. You could even file it down if you wanted to. That's reasonably flat and straight. Doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Might actually be more interesting, especially since the condition of our chain links here. There we go. Now we want a second link. Freshen up that edge. Mark with a pencil so they're the same height. Saw. going to be sure to rotate it around. Work out my edge. There we go. So we have our two upright pieces. Now I can also have a crossbar, but since I want this to be more of a ruin type of a chain link fence, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cut down some of this, make it look like it's a broken pipe. A couple different ways I can do that. Either cut it with the X-Acto. I'm going to see what happens when I flex this. So there we go. So you can see how it bent this. I'm going to glue these down. If I wanted to make this stronger, I could actually take a paper clip and pin that to the Sculpey. And I think it's going to be strong enough to hold on its own. A little bit more glue. There we go. And now for a chain link fence. Which way do we want it to go? Again, I can go any number of different ways. That looks very damaged. This, I almost want to pull it out like so, and I'm going to cut it here. Now I can use my scissors. That's going to chunk up my scissors a little bit, so I'm going to use my metal snips here, cut through that. So this is just it. This could be a hastily assembled defense, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little more of a clean cut down here. Now that I'm actually going to use my scissors because I want that to be a little bit cleaner. There we go. Now this edge is a little bit too clean for me, so I'm going to go back to my wire cutters. And there we go. Pull away some of that. Same thing on the other side. And put a hole in the fence. So there we go. I'm actually going to cut away more of this pole. And now we can just glue it to our two uprights. Now again, if you want this to be more real, more intact, we can put a crossbar on there, but really I just wanted to give the impression of a fence. Now this is where you end up gluing your hands, but there we go. So once he stands in front of that, you're going to forget that, okay, that's just polystyrene tubing. Another way to kind of hide all this is we're going to put a little texture on the concrete, and we're going to throw some sand and gravel on there too. Damage this a little bit. Could even have on the broken fence, maybe these cut his way through it. You can also put razor wire over the top of that. There's probably 3 or 4 different companies that sell that. I know Secret Weapon has some that we could put on there too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my glue, fill in some of these gaps here with the glue. I'm even going to put some up here. And I'm actually going to get some larger rocks to put on here. You saw that I had the medium and the light. And here is some heavy. Pull out a few pieces. Put this rock over here. A few smaller ones in there. A larger one there. One on the back. Medium. Finish this off with our sand with the light. Now the reasons why I go from the heaviest to the lightest is if I start out with the lightest, well, all the glue is now going to be covered in sand. So I go with the heaviest first, then the medium, then the light, because what the light does is it fills in, even here where there's some super glue. See, it's going to catch there. What this also does is it's going to strengthen the base of where my uprights join to the base. Now you can have little pieces of paper maybe brushed up against the fence, like the wind's blowing them up against the fence here. I'll move this out of the way so you can see that. You could even take another piece of plastic card and put a metal sign there. I'm going to snip away a little square of card and show you that. So here we go. You can see we could have a sign on the fence here, some kind of warning, keep out. So let's do that. And what I'm going to do is kind of ding the edges of this sign up a little bit. Cut down these edges, I don't like that. There we go. What I'm going to do is throw down some glue here. And we're going to throw a sign on there. So right away, you can see, you position him here. Look at that. You can see that sign just over his. So again, just like on other bases, we have something that tells a story here. It's still very playable. You can see that other bases can get right up to it, but already, and once he's on there, what I'm going to do is snip away some of his pin, and I'm going to actually drill a hole for his foot here. And we'll position him on this base. So there you go. Again, there's just a little more to this. Maybe this is a commander type figure. So again, this versus just him on a rock and gravel base, there's a little more story here. So let's put out some of the bases that we've done. So there we go. You have Sci Fi Bases. So it's time for us to work with our Sculpey and get it ready for baking. I have some items out on the table here. This metal thing right here, it's called a clay extruder. It's really a pasta machine. However, once you use it for Sculpey, it ceases to be a pasta machine because you're not going to want to use this for food. It's either or. It's Sculpey or it's pasta. This device can make sheets of Sculpey. They're about this thickness. This is the widest that you can go. You can go thinner than this. Actually, there's 7 settings on here. This is on setting 7. You can go paper thin if you want. But if you're going to go that thin, you need a stronger type of Sculpey, maybe or Fimo or something like that. This regular white Sculpey that we're using here, this is what is ideal for carving. It's relatively hard once it's baked, but this is the type of Sculpey that you can carve very easily with all those different sculpting tools. And make sure it's the original Sculpey. And make sure it's white. If it's pink, or if it has any kind of color to it, that's either Sculpey 2 or Super Sculpey. And you're going to find that it's much more rubbery, it's much harder, much more brittle, and your tools are going to have a really tough time getting through it. Now this is a really huge box. Right here you can see this is 8 pounds of Sculpey. Typical package I think is 1 pound. Now I got this on Amazon at a really nice price, so I was very happy. Now the Sculpey comes in blocks like this. I think the 1 pound package has 3 of these. And these are wrapped in plastic. You really want to keep these as sealed up as you can because Sculpey does dry out with time. I can tell even here this is getting a little bit harder. It's been around for several months now. So you want to, necessarily, unless you're going to use a lot of Sculpey, you may just want to use the 1 pound packages instead. So what you need to do is have a few other items too. I've got some ceramic tiles that are the perfect platform for rolling out your Sculpey, for putting on your sheets, and they'll fit in your oven or toaster oven very nicely. Metal trays, I found out the hard way, have a tendency to warp and shift. And again, you're also sacrificing your cookie sheet or pizza pan, whatever it is. Once you've put Sculpey and baked it on it, it's not acceptable for food anymore. So I strongly recommend just finding these at any hardware store, home repair store. I got a few other things here. I've got this. This is a acrylic tube This was sold in the hobby store in the same section as a Sculpey, but a piece of PVC pipe will do exactly the same thing. Got myself a roller right here. This is very nice for rolling out the thicker sheets of Sculpey and making sure that my thin sheets, they don't have air bubbles and are nice and flat on our tiles. I also have an X-Acto knife here, and I use that for cutting off my sheets, making sure that they fit on the tile. You can, if you want, kind of pre-cut your sheets. Let's say you want some squares or rectangles. You can do that. It's not the easiest thing in the world because this Sculpey, before it's been baked, it wants to kind of pull and stretch. But a super sharp X-Acto knife can kind of help you with that. Now, to get your Sculpey ready to put in the clay extruder / pasta machine, you have to work it like this. You have to kind of fold it over itself several times. You can see, and watch what happens when I take this and go to work it. See, there's all these splits and cracks. Well, you need to work that Sculpey till all those splits and cracks are gone. And that's what I've done here with this piece. Now I'm going to take some of it off. And there's a couple different ways you can approach this. I'm going to make more of a little tube right here. And I'm going to flatten out parts of it. And not completely. And what this does is it kind of helps get rid of some of the air bubbles that you might find. It presses those out. I've got a kind of a sheet going on here. Now I have this on setting 7, again the thickest setting. What you're hearing now is a little crank. And I'm going to put the Sculpey in there. I grab the other end. Crank this. I want to keep that crank working relatively quickly because otherwise you're going to get these little stair steps. So I'm going to put this on my sheet. Cut off the ends. So now I have some Sculpey that's ready for baking. Once I take my roller and make sure that it's flat. Now if I wanted to maybe make a square out of this, I can always take my triangle and cut away some of the extra Sculpey here. So now I have a much finer edge when I bake it. Sculpey will sometimes shrink a little bit when you bake it. That's something you might want to be aware of when you go to bake things. You can make much wider sheets, as I've done here, by simply squeezing it out into a larger surface. Remember, before we just worked with a tube. Here, squeeze this out into more of a complete sheet. Throw it in the extruder. And you can see now I've got myself a sheet. And if you feel a need, you can cut away some of the edges. Now let's say you want a much thicker sheet. What I advise is actually flattening it out into another sheet, just like we prepared the other one. You can see I've left this much thicker. I haven't smashed it down quite as much. Made myself a little bit of a rectangular border, and I set this down. I'm going to take my roller and I'm going to carefully start to roll out some of the divots that I've created with my thumbprints. You can see I'm flipping this over multiple times. Just like this. And I'm going to continue to do this until I don't see any thumbprints or divots. Notice I'm not just going back and forth like this, because what tends to happen is you smash this side, you smash this side. So I'm going like this, and an X, like this, and an X. Now it is going to be a little bit thinner than when you first started, but still, it's going to be much thicker than what you can get out of here. So here we have, you can see just how much thicker that is than what we can get with the clay extruder. Now once you've got this all set, you have a full sheet for baking. Let's throw some of this out here. Full sheet like this, ready for baking. That's when I bring out a toaster oven. So I'm going to move the sheet over here so you can see that. There we go. And I'm going to move up the camera just a little bit. There we go. Now, the toaster oven I like to use because Sculpey does have a little bit of a smell to it. Not much, maybe imperceptible to some, but if the oven is the same thing you're using to bake pizzas and pies, maybe you don't want your pies to taste like Sculpey. And that's why I like the toaster ovens. They're really not all that expensive. You can put these wherever. They don't occupy your oven. And this little guy is just perfect. Throw in a sheet just like that. Now, you want to follow the baking instructions, and this one obviously says do not microwave, and you don't want to overbake this. This stuff will catch on fire. I found that out once when I put it on broil, and Sculpey doesn't like 500 degrees. What it likes is 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 130 degrees Celsius. And it says 15 minutes for every quarter inch. I tend to stick with 20. These sheets that I've baked here, these are all baked at 20 minutes. You can see there's no burning. If you ever get burnt edges on your Sculpey, well then that means you either have your oven set too hot, it's been in there too long. Just never have burnt edges around your Sculpey. In fact, you can bake Sculpey multiple times. Here's one of those thicker sheets. It's been baked. You can see that this stuff breaks just like it's supposed to. You can cut it. And carve it. And if it can't do this, then maybe you've baked it too long. If it's too spongy, then maybe you haven't baked it long enough. Every oven is different. I found that out too. It took me a while to get used to this toaster oven. It was different than our regular oven. I'm sure every toaster oven is different. So you'll just, I would suggest starting out with just a few sheets of Sculpey and just try that out. Try different settings. You may need to bake it a little longer. You may need to bake it less.
decadent, forcing my will now to be rebent. And the lights do gleam as if inside of a dream, here in my mind where it can all be seen. Hey! They try to hide your face, and I am aware of how to find your trace. Subdued and mild as if you're in a child, it's calling you to be free and wild. The game you'll play, you'll dance the night away, laughing as you're gonna stalk your prey. Fancy dress or in your darkest vest, well, here is the place where you can join the rest. Is where that all your fun gets had. The game you play, you'll dance the night away, laughing as you go to stalk your